I'm Andrea. I'm a programmer and the creator of bite-sized architecture sessions. As you can see in the slides, this is like a snapshot of my career. And after having talked to a lot of you, I can see that I'm not that different to all of you. In that, I've been on big and small companies, and I made my own startup and consulted and all of that. And now I live in New Zealand, which is great, and work for Atlassian, and which are very kind in allowing me to be here today. And so the nice thing about having experienced all of those things is that I got to experience architectural decisions in many different ways. And I want to invite you to think about this. How many times have important decisions, like really important ones, gone exactly like you expected? All the time. Exactly. So, very nice. The thing about this is like you start thinking about all the things that are happening. The decisions take a lot longer than you expect or shorter. You expect the people to love these decisions and they hate it. And everyone suddenly hates you or the decision or something else. It's kind of unexpected, and you're trying to deal with also how frustrating the whole process can be. Why are people so stubborn? Why they don't love your idea that's so great? It's ridiculous, right? So I think Andrew Harmon-Law, in his book, Facilitating Software Architecture, which is about to come out, I think it's actually coming out today, and I quote, these decisions are kind of happening one on top of the other, and they affect each other, annoyingly, right? It's not like these decisions are nicely isolated for us to experience them. And the interesting thing about this is these decisions are also a record of the power structures and the feedback loops that got it there. And I really want to make a point of making you think about the power structures and the feedback loops and how hard it can be to capture them. So what are we doing today? We're going to go over some scenarios. I actually put examples of architectural decisions. It's more like the context in which we probably did some decisions that we're all somewhat familiar with. Then we're going to think about the anatomy of a decision. We're going to think about power and knowledge and what is that even. And then we're going to try to think about some tools to try to maybe have some sort of like therapy session after all of that. So that would be good. So example scenarios. So I'm going to go through 3 scenarios. And I know that you've had a long day where you ate too many cakes and probably had too much coffee, but just push through. These are common scenarios, but are very different. I know, right? And so these 3 scenarios, what is the common thing through all of them, right? So imagine you need to make a decision in this context. Who has not been, or who has been in this context? Acquisitions. Aren't they like great fun? Everything feels so certain. They're not. They don't. And there's a lot of anxiety, right, in both parts. So either if you were being acquired, or if you are on the company that has acquired another thing, and suddenly you need to integrate these 2 things and make them do something, anything that remotely resembles functionality in quite a short time. And so how do you make a decision with that level of uncertainty? And how do you, as a decision maker, help everyone make sense of things? It's not trivial. So what's happening there? Another scenario. If you've been in the Scala community, this is going to probably ring true to you. So imagine you're in the context of your business depends on something, and that something needs to go away. It could be a third party. It could be a service. You told people, we shouldn't be just so reliant on this, but did they listen? And yet, here you are, having to deal with the consequences, right? And interestingly, how do you compute all the side effects, right? So, a third scenario. Fear. So as an incident happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it's absolutely indispensable to learn from previous mistakes. However, should we still be making decisions with the ghost of incidents past? Maybe not, right? So with all those scenarios, I'm going to ask you, how do we get into the anatomy of the decision? Basically, what are these ingredients, right? So down below here, you'll see a decision process. I actually wanted to use Sonia's, but then I didn't. Anyway, this is from Andrew's, but you can kind of slaughter in there if you want. The idea is more to kind of give you a timeline as we think about this. So what are some ingredients? What are things we need? We need to know the context. You need to make a decision, definitely need some context, yeah? Yeah. Right, so we need to understand the current system's capabilities and constraints, right? Understand what is it that you're working on. You need to understand the problem, right? So most importantly, not just you understanding the problem, you need to agree with other people about what the problem is, which is actually quite trivial. No, it's not trivial. You need to understand what are the competing problems. Because if you're going to be dealing with a problem, you need to not deal with another problem. Which one's more important? How are you going to deal with that? You need to know how to implement the solution, right? And maybe understand the trade-offs that come with that solution. You need to know how to collect feedback. Also, you need to know how to ask the right questions to the right people and be able to be in the position to be able to ask those questions correctly. You need to know the options that you actually have. Sonia was telling us about probably a good idea to have 3 options, but maybe you have too many options. You need to understand which ones you should present to whom, why. Again, non-trivial. You need to know who you work with and what can they do. Because, otherwise you can't actually do that thing. Collaboration. Again, something you need to know. You need to know how to validate that the problem has actually been solved. How many times have you been somewhere where decisions happen and then something was implemented and the problem comes back magically because we haven't actually checked that we have solved the problem? An interesting thing to do here is change the roadmap. Don't worry, there isn't too many more. You need to be able to actually make the decision and block other decisions. You need to convince people and ask people to implement your solutions. Now, this is just some ingredients that I thought were like essential. And the interesting thing is, as you look at them like this, I was thinking, what is this? What are these? What do they have in common? Well, I thought that they fell into these 2 categories. Not precisely, right? It's more like there is a nice intersection there. And they kind of boil down to knowing something or having the power to do something. And the interesting thing about this is that knowledge and power feed each other. As in, if you have knowledge, it gives you power. And if you have power, it gives you access to knowledge, or something like that. But is it though? What is even power or knowledge? What are those things? And also, you'll notice that I did this decision process underneath, and I have this amazing animation effect in one of them. It's like so cool. So what I wanted to do there is imagine this is your organization, and you can map the amount of knowledge or power that it takes to make a decision and wonder, is this what you want? Is this how you want the decision process to be like? And if you don't, what would you do about it? The really, really interesting thing about talking about power that I found as I was trying to learn about this is that it's extremely uncomfortable. I felt that. I don't know if you're feeling it, but learning about it, I felt like I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't learn about this. Like it was nearly taboo. Then you start reading about it, and there's this really strange stuff and conflicting about what is power. So I thought I would try to synthesize that and present it in a way to try to help you bridge this discomfort, because power exists. And learning about it is essential to being effective, to be taken seriously, and to not being taken advantage of. So I'm going to present you with 2 definitions. There are more, but I really think this, again, I'm trying to give you synthesis. So the first one is power with, and this comes from Mary Parker Follett. And she says, she said in the 1800s when she was alive, that power might be defined as simply the ability to make things happen, to be a causal agent, to initiate change. And if you think this is somewhat interesting or whatever, I highly recommend this book, where her collected works are available. And also you can find the book online, open. Another definition of power that you will see is about power being the ability to make others do as you would have them do. In here, I'm going to also call you and ask you to do this difficult thing of, you probably look at these 2 definitions and think, yeah, I can relate to that. The thing is, can you relate to those at the same time? Do you use one definition for something and the other definition for something else? Where do you use each one and why? Introspect and see what you find out. I found surprising things about myself. Not all of them very happy, but some of them were. So with those 2 definitions of power in place, I wondered, where does power come from? And again, so many resources about this. And I chose The Dawn of Everything, which is a book about the history of humanity, right? As a source of trying to find the source of power, if you would. And I think this is particularly interesting for software architecture decisions, because I think it really resonates. And I'm sure you're all dying to know what they are. Okay, so the first one is authority. And in the context of software architecture, that could be something like access to rooms where discussions are happening, access to repos, access. Then there is charisma, and then there is access to knowledge, right? So again, this is where we start seeing that feedback loop type thing coming really into itself. And the next thing is about laws of power. So how does power actually work? Well, it's funny because these 3 laws kind of balance each other ideally. So power is dynamic. Whatever situation you are in when it comes to power, it's going to change. And you can see this all the time. So wherever you are, one thing you know for sure is going to change. The question is how. Power is like water, and your organization is the sponge, right? So the power is in every crevice of the sponge, and it's happening. So you know that the power is there, and so you have to use it. The last law of power is that if you have power, you tend to get more power. And so on this particular thing, you need to remember that the other 2 are also true, because it can feel like, but if the powerful people get more power, how do you deal with that? And this is where you have to remember that there's power everywhere, and that is dynamic. If you're particularly interested in this, I can recommend this related read called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So this is a book written in the 70s. I found it a slightly uncomfortable read, but also a really illuminating read to understand how power works. So that's some interesting things about power there. So now, we're moving to knowledge, right? So knowledge is something that, we kind of say knowledge a lot. We're knowledge workers, aren't we? And so when you try to learn about knowledge, it's a little bit easier in that you're very soon, you soon encounter this data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid. And I think it's a really good visual cue as to how we should consider knowledge. For a start, it's based on facts. Facts that are, just, they don't have a lot of context or anything, but we should base it on facts. And then, on top of that, you have information, which is, it's something that gives the data shape and meaning. Then, there's knowledge, whereas you get information with experience. So you have understanding and application of information, and it's some stuff that you got through experience. And finally, you have wisdom. And that's about the highest level of insight. It's something that you got through time. And you might be thinking, okay, why do I care about this in the context of architectural decisions? Maybe, or maybe you're not thinking that. Maybe like, I got this, it's grand. But I thought I would give you an example. How does this look like? How could I apply this? So imagine that you just learned that the license for a load-bearing library is changing in a significant way. You have to move out. And you know that this affects 300 of your tier 1 services. And it's happening soon. And if you don't do it, maybe it will cost you billions. I know this actually has happened. So you have some data points there. What do you do next? Well, with information, you'd be thinking about migration paths, trial some libraries. With knowledge, you might realize that one solution doesn't fit all your services. Maybe you want to have some principles on how to drive the migration. Finally, you want to classify and help teams on board into established paths. So you want to think, how am I going to become more resilient over time? How am I not going to have a problem that costs me billions again? Right? So I didn't give you a knowledge definition at the start, but I'm going to give you one now from Diana Montaleon and her really, really cool book called Learning Systems Thinking. And I really think she really captured what knowledge is in the context of software architecture, and that is the sophisticated integration of data, information, and experience. It is the conceptual material we use to create laws and theorems, best practices and heuristics, strategies, and predictions based on patterns. That's a really, I think that really captures it. And further to that, she says that wisdom is our ability to discover through leverage points in the systems we inhabit and push them in a valuable direction. So this is coming from a book on systems thinking, so it's not surprising to find system theory kind of words. And I want to bring your attention to leverage points, systems we inhabit, and the valuable direction. So the reason I'm highlighting this is because a leverage point is something where you make a small change that can have massive impact, right? And so finding that point can be tricky. Most people know more or less where it's at, but not exactly what is it. And in systems, when you find the leverage point, the intuitive thing to do is generally exactly the opposite thing of what you should do to get the result you want. So this is why the wisdom thing is really important, because it's saying we're pushing it in a valuable direction, which is very exciting, at least to me. So we talked about knowledge and wisdom, but we are knowledge workers, right? We're the people that get paid to think. That's what we do, right? We're trying to think for a living, which is quite different from, it's not the other stuff is a byproduct of our thinking. Further to that, we don't work alone, unfortunately. Because it would be a lot easier, right? If you did work alone, you don't have to coordinate with other people and stuff. No, you have to work with other people, and so you have your own knowledge because you're a knowledge worker, and that's all the store that you have developed or you can access. So that's what knowledge stock is. And knowledge flow is your ability to transfer knowledge between people in ways that change and shift the system in an effective way. So this picture is telling you knowledge sharing is systems building, right? You cannot do, imagine this, right? If you're in your company and you don't talk to anyone or communicate with anyone, can you do something? Anything happen? Probably not much. So knowledge sharing is really important, and we all know that. And there are many papers that validate this. This is the one where it's clearest, I think. And this is basically saying that knowledge transfer among employees is thought to be a crucial determinant of an organization's capacity to utilize new knowledge and innovate. So the key words here are knowledge transfer, crucial determinant to innovation. The thing is, when you get to talking about knowledge sharing, what is really common is that people think, you know what, our documentation is just not good enough. But you know what, it wouldn't be an Andrea talk if I didn't bring some history of programming languages or history of systems and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to bring up my good friend. He's not my friend, sorry. So this paper called Programming as Theory Building from 1985, just nearly 40 years ago, basically says that the program text, so the code, and its documentation has proven insufficient as a carrier of some of the most important design ideas. What I'm saying here is that documentation is necessary. Do not take away documentation bad. No, that's not what I'm saying. Documentation, good. Reading the code, good. It's just not enough, right? The conclusion of the paper says something like, the conclusion seems inescapable that, at least with certain kinds of large programs, all of our programs these days, the continued adaptation, modification, and correction of errors in them, it is essentially dependent on certain kinds of knowledge, which you know what it is, possessed by a group of programmers who are closely and continuously connected with them. So yes, documentation is important, but keeping it together. So an interlude, because I know I gave you a lot. I'm sorry. I know it was tougher when I read about it, so I gave you some parrots as a reward. Because they're very cute, aren't they? So what now? What do we do with this? All this knowledge. I believe that if you understand something, you have more options, right? So these slides, all of them have some sources at the end in case you are curious. So don't worry, they'll be online in a minute. So, sorry, Ross. We are all part of a socio-technical system. And I'm saying it like this because it's really easy to forget how the system's rules really apply. So the whole thing about knowledge stock and flow, it affects you. The whole socio-technical forces playing into everything you do, the power, those laws of power, guess what? They're affecting you. So you need to be aware of them, learn from them, and react to them. It's not something you can opt out of, right? So what do we do now? Tools. So the problem with, I was trying to find good things for size of things, or like, organization, teams. I just find it too overloaded, so I went with music, because why not? Also, a great opportunity to put a picture of King Gordon on the on here. So, yeah, some tools. First, concert-sized tools. So this is about, 20 plus, maybe 30 plus tools that you can think about. I am not going to explain the tools in detail. I'm just going to tell you more or less what they are and why I chose them. But first, I'm going to have some water because I'm dying. Right. So the architecture advice process says that, and now this is terrifying if you're actually paying attention. Anyone, just think about it, anyone can make a decision, right? But before they do that, they must seek advice from all the affected parties and from people with expertise on the matter. Slightly less terrifying. They can also ignore it, by the way. So why am I suggesting that you should look into this tool? First, it resets massively the power balance. And so that's likely to make change. And second, when it comes to knowledge flow and knowledge stock, because anyone can make a decision, it's likely that a lot of decisions will happen within teams, which means that knowledge flow will increase, which is kind of cool. So I'm not basically advocating that you should leave now and go running and implement this. What I'm suggesting is that you consider where you are now and where do you want to be. And maybe this suggests some on-ramp into something where you would like to be, where decisions are not blocked by either ivory tower architects or hands-on architects, because actually both models block in some way. Second, team topologies. So I was just in a workshop run here, and it was amazing. And I'm not going to try to summarize that, because that would be crazy. But what I will say is that this is a model for describing the organizations of teams, right? And there's some types of teams. And what I really like is that they try to really model the interactions that happen between those teams. And the whole point of that, and how did this relate to the power and knowledge thing, is that it's trying to formulate about how the knowledge flow happens. So I think that's really, really interesting as a way to think about how would I like communication and knowledge sharing to happen in my organization? Well, this is a tool to think about it in a more frameworky way. Like, it gives you some sort of guidance on how to model those. Right. We get to karaoke-sized tools. And I am slightly biased here. You can find both bite-sized architecture sessions and many others in this amazing book by Evelyn, Hien, and Kenny. And if you want to learn about collaborative software design, this is the book. So what is bite-sized architecture sessions? This is a workshop format where you do modeling for an hour. And then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. And you do it in small, kind of 8 to 10 people type thing. The session itself focuses on alone together, which is a time in which you are all in there, and you model something on your own while you're in the same kind of virtual or physical room. And when a timer elapses, you tell the story of what you just modeled, and everyone listens. Then the next person does the same, and the next person does the same, the next person does the same. And when you're done with that, in the next part, you kind of come together and do exactly the thing that you just did, but all of you together. And the main thing that you want there is that when you're doing it all together, you get the benefit of having the understanding of how everyone else in the room actually thinks about this problem, right? So why am I suggesting this tool? Well, from a power point of view, because of Alone Together, you're resetting the communication structures that you have there. There's no I'm speaking first, because nobody's speaking first. You're speaking first to yourself, right? And then the whole point of this tool is to help teams come together with a more homogeneous understanding of their systems. The way I generally recommend getting started with this is by doing C4, right? So they do the highest level of a C4 model, which is a kind of multiple layer approach to modeling your systems. So imagine Kim Gordon, how happy she would be that we're just referencing her with this. Anyway, so solo size tool, these are tools for you. You're here right now and you're wondering, why am I learning all this? Well, or what do I do with this knowledge that I just acquired, right? So there's two tools, left-hand column and influence map. Left-hand column is something that will help you deal with really awkward conversations. You know, when you go like, argh, which I mean, I know it happens, right? So what's the crack with this? So when you are in a meeting, or maybe after you've been in a meeting and something is happening, you really have two conversations happening. One is the one conversation that people are saying, and the other one is what you're thinking and feeling, and what they might be thinking and feeling. So on the right side, you write what actually happened, and on the left side, you write what you thought. A great example of this is, imagine you just did something. I don't know, you broke the bill, something. It doesn't really even matter what it is. You broke the bill, or you fixed the build, and you're in a meeting about breaking or fixing the build. So you go like, hey, you know, I broke the build, and there's 5 other people in the meeting, and for some reason you're in a meeting about this. Slightly dysfunctional, but you know, here we go. I've heard worse. Anyway, you're in this meeting, and these other people, you thought they'd be happy to hear about either of these situations. Sorry about the terrible analogy. And, but they aren't. They are not reacting how you thought. So you're like, I told them, broke the build, and they're like, happy, strange. Or they are completely enraged. And you're like, okay, I broke the build, it's bad, but their reaction doesn't make sense. So what this helps you do is kind of trying to give you some sort of pause and inspect on how you think and feel about what's happening, which is surprisingly useful. And this deals with power. This helps you with power stuff. The last tool is an influence map. So you know how I told you about how my journey through learning about power, I found it slightly uncomfortable and difficult to learn, and especially difficult to see, right? So this influence map that you see here is about understanding networks of power. There are many versions of this influence map, and what you see here is that D is the decision maker, and these other icons there and their arrows is other people, like the triangles are people and the question marks are kind of, I'm not really sure about this, and this is how people influence each other. I don't think this is applicable to all of our decisions, by the way, but I think that if you're trying to learn about power, doing something like this that helps you really see the power in some way and give you some sort of distance from what's happening might really help. I found it really helpful. So, to make this talk, I have read quite a few things. In fact, this is not all I read. There is also more resources in my website, which is in roundcrisis.com. And it's a system. Mind those feedback loops, right? As part of your system, you can make change, right? There is power flowing through the system, and the power laws apply. Finally, it's a technical system full of knowledge workers. How are you optimizing for knowledge stock and flow? And with that, I want to say thank you. Are there any questions?